Hey, good evening. Welcome to Abundant Life Church. We're glad that you're with us tonight. Looks like a lot of people stayed home getting ready for this storm coming in. It's 3 days away, people. We're glad that you're joining us tonight. Got some good things going to go on tonight. We're going to be studying the life of Jesus. We're talking about his birth. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 1, in Luke chapter 3. Going to be looking at some things about Jesus's genealogy and who was in his genealogy. I want you to take a second. I've got a thought about something here. I want you to think about who is your most famous relative? Who are you connected to? Who in your life or in your roots can you say, I was connected to this person right here, and everybody knows him? When I was in 7th grade, the teacher said to our class, I want you to write a story about your favorite family member. So I wrote a story about my favorite family member, turned it in, and when I got it back, I had an F. And I was not happy. So I went home and told my mom, so she had to call the school, and so she asked the teacher, why did he get an F on this paper? And she said to my mother, he got an F because he didn't follow instructions. I told the class to write a story on their most favorite relative. And he wrote a story about George Washington. I didn't tell him to write about the president. I told him to write about their most favorite relative. And my mom said, well, he did what you asked him to do, because George Washington is in our lineage. And she had to explain that on my mother's side, on her mother's side, my grandmother on my mother's side, her maiden name before she got married, that would be a maiden name, her maiden name was Ball, B-A-L-L. And if you trace the Ball family back, when you get to George Washington's family, his mother was a Ball before she married his father. And so George Washington was a great uncle about 12 times removed. I guess that's how they say that. And so my teacher had to change my grade because I did follow instructions. I wrote about my most favorite relative. Even though I'd never met him, he made an impression on me because he was part of my family. And so tonight we're going to look at some things, because what's interesting is the people that are in our lineage, that's in our ancestry. And right now, for some reason, people in America have this fascination about where they come from. And there's this one commercial on TV that I have to laugh about, because the guy gets up and he talks about how he thought he was Scottish and how he wore kilts and, you know, all of that. And then he did Ancestor, whatever the company is, and he found out that he was German. So he gave up the kilts and went to the lederhosen, or whatever it's called. But he did something because he found out his heritage was a little different than what he thought. And so it's interesting when you look at genealogy, because it really connects people to who they are. And so tonight, since we're looking at different things about the history of Jesus, as we study his birth, we're going to look at his genealogy, his ancestors, where he came from. And it's interesting to me how two of the writers of the gospel actually laid out the genealogy of Jesus. You're going to find that in Matthew chapter 1 and in Luke chapter 3. Both of them lay out the genealogy of Jesus, but both of them do it in a little different sense. One of them only goes back to Abraham and goes forward, or starts from Abraham, goes to Jesus. And this is the one that's in Matthew, and he starts with Abraham, he goes to Jesus. The one in Luke chapter 3, starts with Jesus and goes backwards in the lineage, and he goes all the way to Adam. And it's kind of really interesting because one of them traces the lineage of Mary, and one of them chases the lineage of Joseph. And it's really interesting because Joseph was not biologically the father of Jesus. So you say, why did they trace Joseph and his lineage? Because when you look at both of the lineages, they cross. So as I was doing some studying about this and reading about this, there was a commentator who made this comment, that Mary was an only child. They've never been able to show if she had any brothers or sisters. It's never mentioned. And in the Jewish culture, when a father, what a father does is his heritage or his inheritance is passed down to the sons. Girls are never, at that time, girls never got an inheritance, especially when it came to land. They couldn't own land. It's only one time in Scripture when it talks about the landowners, and there was one group, one family who fought through the system, and it's recorded in Scripture where the girls inherited the land, and it's only done one time, because you never gave land to the daughters. It always went to the boys. And the purpose of that is to keep it in the family. And generally, a woman would marry, and then that man that she married would inherit the land from his father. And so part of the reason that, as I studied this, one commentator said was that because Mary was an only child and had no brothers, had no sisters, that the father had nowhere to pass down the heritage. And so when Mary married Joseph, the father took him as his own, and that was the custom. That when a man married a girl who had no brothers, then that father took that new husband as his own son. And that's why as we look at this, you're going to say, now wait a minute, how can the same family members be in Joseph's family as they were in Mary's family? You know, you'd think you were coming from Arkansas. I'm just kidding, Arkansas. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Sue, if you're watching me, I was joking. I'm just joking. So we're just teasing, Sue. And Janet. Oh, wait, we have a whole bunch of people from Arkansas. Delete it. Turn it off before it gets out there. Anyway, so the as we look at these lineages, we're going to look at 5 people in particular, because in the bloodline of Jesus there are 5 women that are mentioned, and we're going to look at those 5 women, and we're going to see. What's interesting is that Jesus's bloodline was messed up. It was not pure. You would think that Jesus's bloodline would be just about the cleanest bloodline you could get, and in reality, his bloodline was a mess. And so we're gonna look at 5 women that you see in there. And what's interesting is 2 of them were prostitutes, and they made it into the lineage of Jesus. And that's pretty fascinating. You know, where you would think, well, why would they include that in the in the lineage? You would think, let's hide these people. But you can't deny who you're connected to. You can't deny it. And so these people, even though they had a past that was that we would consider less than honorable, Jesus valued them enough to allow his disciples to write his lineage and include those people who were less than desirable, I guess you could say. And so it's pretty interesting. So let's take a look at those 5 women, and let's see who they are, okay? And if you're watching online, if any of you have an interesting relative in your past, send me a message. Tell me who's in your past that is interesting that we might know. Maybe you're connected to somebody that's interesting, kind of like I am. I was telling a story before some of you got in here that I'm related through my mother's mother to George Washington, and so it's kind of interesting. Oh, you were watching it?
I had it up my ears.
I don't know what that old country show was, like in the 70s.
Hee-haw?
Yeah, hee-haw. My great something was on the show.
Really? Awesome. See? There we go. There we go.
My dad's side.
So we've got a person off of hee-haw. That's a good start. He's proud. And then and I'm connected to a president. Anybody else want to say who they're connected to? You got nothing? All right. Good evening. Man, there's a bunch of you on here tonight, so we're going to have a good time. All right, so the first one that we're going to talk about is a pretty interesting story, and this is in the book of Genesis chapter 38. The first woman, her name is Tamar. And Tamar was married to the son of Judah. Now, does anybody remember who Judah was? Yeah, he was one of the 12 brothers, or one of the 12 sons of Jacob. And it's interesting, what does the word Judah mean? Praise. So the whole concept of the tribe of worship is Judah. And so Judah had his oldest son, and his oldest son married this girl named Tamar. And then his son died and left her as a widow. In the custom of the Jewish custom that God set up, is that if a man was married to a woman and he died, then she became the husband of his brother. By default, the brother had to marry her. Now, he could have his own wife too, but he had to take her as a wife, and he had to bear children by her in the name of his brother. So he had to pass on the lineage of his brother through his brother's wife, so that that man would not be childless because of his death. And so when Judah's son died, Judah's other sons were still too young. And so he said to Tamar, "Go back to your home, to your father, and when my sons get old enough, I will come get you, and you can marry the next son in line." Well, a few years passed. The brothers all grew up and married, and Judah never went and got Tamar to wed her to a brother so she would have children. So Tamar came up with a plan, and she dressed herself up as a prostitute, and she waited on the side of the road because she knew Judah would come along this pathway, and she waited for Judah until he came, And when he came, she threw out her offer, and Judah took the offer and went into her tent, slept with her, and she got pregnant. So now Tamar becomes pregnant by her dead husband's father, and she, and bore him a son, and because of that, that son became the lineage of Jesus. Isn't that crazy? And so so what happened was, when Judah, and so to go into the rest of the story, Judah went, and later, because he realized, man, I've messed up here. I slept with a prostitute, and I don't want to get caught. And so he sent somebody down to take care of the situation. And when they got there, they began to look for the prostitute, and they began to question the people around there, and the people said, there's no prostitute here. There's never been a prostitute here. None of them work on this corner. This is not a corner for the prostitutes. They're down the street. He's like, wait a minute, there was a prostitute here. And it came out after doing investigation that he found out that his daughter-in-law had tricked him, and that she now was pregnant with his son. Wow. So we have this situation where if Judah would have been a man of integrity and a godly man, in the way that his father or his grandfather, or at least Abraham, had taught him to be. Jacob was pretty deceiving too, and he grew up with Jacob. So, Jacob had some interesting situations in his life. And so Judah followed suit with some of the characteristics that Jacob had demonstrated. And so Tamar resorted to trickery to force her father-in-law to do the right thing. And because of that, Tamar produced a son that became the ancestor of Jesus. And so that's interesting. And so if you look in Matthew 1, you will see here the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. To Abraham was born Isaac, and to Isaac Jacob, and to Jacob Judah and his brothers. Now watch this, because it gets even fun. It gets even crazier. And to Judah were born Perez and Zerah by Tamar. So not only did he get her pregnant once, he got her pregnant twice.
Ow.
Well, because now he had to take her as a wife. This is the ancestors of Jesus. And what we're going to find through these ancestors of Jesus is we're going to find great hope for all of us. Because if they can be in the lineage of Jesus, we get to be in the lineage of Jesus. Through his blood, through his death. So that's a great thing. So to Judah, verse 3, were born Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and to Perez was born Hezron, and Hezron Ram. And then it goes on down until you come up to Jesus in verse 16. So it's interesting. So there's the first woman that we see. Tamar was a woman who entered into the lineage of Jesus because Judah was deceptive and she became deceptive, and they became an ancestor of Jesus. Trick or treat. Good. Yeah, that was a trick or treat right there. There you go. Okay, so that's the first woman in the story. Any questions? Listen, if you're watching online, you have a question, just type out the question for us, and my tech team will get it to me, and we'll answer any questions that we can. All right, so the second person, any questions on that? Nope, okay. The second person that we want to look at is Rahab. Now, Rahab, her story is found in Joshua chapter 2 and in Joshua chapter 6. And Rahab, by trade, was a prostitute. The Bible calls her that she was a harlot, and she was in the city of Jericho. In chapter 2, when Joshua sent the 2 spies in, he said, go in, spy out the land, and somehow they came across Rahab, and Rahab said to her, if you go and read this, I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but Rahab said, if I hide you, because the people of Jericho were looking. They knew that there were spies that came into the city, and they were looking for them. So Rahab took them up on the roof and covered them, and then at night she let them out through a window because her home was on the wall of the city, because the walls of the city were huge. So her home was actually part of the wall, and she had a window in her home that looked out of the city, out into the open. And so she hid them on the roof, and then at night she lowered them out through the window, and the Bible says they ran out into the wilderness and hid for about, I think it was 3 days, and waited until the armies of Jericho had gone searching for them and couldn't find them, so they came back, and once they came back, then the 2 spies ran and told Joshua what was going to happen. So Rahab was a prostitute. Now, here's another thing that we have to remember about Rahab. In Hebrews chapter 11, and this is a key thing here, Hebrews chapter 11 is considered what people call the Faith Hall of Fame. And if you read Hebrews 11, it will name person after person after person who lived a life of faith, trusting God. And Rahab in chapter 11, verse 31, is mentioned in that hall of fame. Wow. So here she is in the city of Jericho as a harlot. She helps those 2 men, and what she said to them was, if I hide you out, when you come to destroy the city of Jericho, and I know you're going to do this, I'm requesting that you allow me and my family to live. Don't kill us. And the 2 spies said, if you don't want to die, then you hang out of your window a sheet or whatever, something, and they told her particularly, hang this out of the window, and we will know not to kill the people in this house. Now, let me ask you a question. What happened to the walls of Jericho?
Down.
How did they fall? Yeah, but how did they fall? They walked around the build. They walked around the city, and after the 7 days, and after the 7th time on the 7th day, what does the Bible say happened to the walls? If you look at it, they went straight down into the ground. Now, how did Rahab's house, she was part of the wall, how did Rahab's house not fall? The rest of the walls fell. She was connected to the wall, and all the rest of the walls fell. And her house stayed up. I mean, when you think about the miracles of God and how he works things, I mean, what would you do if you're standing there, if you're the one, and if you were the photographer of the moment, and you know how they used to send photographers out for news stories, and they're taking all these pictures, and you would be the photographer of the year if your camera was aimed at Rahab's house. And all of the rest of the walls fell into the ground, and this one home continued to stand, even though it was connected to the rest of the wall. Talk about a sawzall, man. God just went, voot, voot, and all the rest of the walls dropped into the ground, and that one house kept standing. God is just incredible how he does these kind of things and how he takes care of us. All because she rescued the spies and she believed God. When those spies walked in, because she said to them when they walked in, she said, "We are closed up because of fear of Joshua and the children of Israel, and we're waiting for you to come and conquer our city." They're waiting. They know it's going to happen. Save my home. Save my home. Tie a yellow ribbon on that window. I don't know if it's yellow. Tie something on that window that we can identify you. And when the walls fell, and if you read it, it makes you think that they just didn't crumble, but literally the earth opened and the walls fell in. Except for that one house. Amazing story. Amazing. Wow. Now, she became Salmon's wife. So somewhere in there, Salmon, because he was considered a noble among the children of Israel and was part of the tribe of Judah, somewhere in all of this picture, he found Rahab to be faithful and married her. There you go. Verse 5 says, Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse. So Rahab the prostitute had a life transformation because she stood in faith that God would rescue her and her family. To where she came from a life where she was a ignorant of God, a sinful woman, a lifestyle of sin, and everybody would say that was a lifestyle of sin, and became a person who was beloved of God, praised for her goodness, and sits in the Hall of Fame. Pretty incredible when you think about who she is. That's awesome. That's absolutely awesome. And she sits in the genealogy of Jesus. Okay. Any questions on Rahab? That's all found in Joshua chapter 2, Joshua chapter 6, and in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31. Do you have that, Jonathan? Hebrews 11, verse 31. So look what it says. By faith, Rahab the harlot. This is in the Hall of Fame. How would you like? Have you ever been to a Hall of Fame? You know, they put down little plaques about who they are. How would you like your plaque to say, the harlot? By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. By faith, she trusted God. Even though she didn't know him, she trusted God. So, Joshua 2, Joshua 6, and Hebrews 11:31. All right, so who do you think the third one is? Ruth, which is right. Yep, Ruth is the third one. All right, so Ruth, and how many of you knew that Ruth was Rahab's granddaughter? Go back there. Go back to that. You had that up there. Solomon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse. So Rahab was Ruth's mother-in-law. Right? Solomon was the father of Rahab, or the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth. So Ruth became Rahab became Ruth's mother-in-law. Anybody ever thought of that? When you read the story of Ruth and how wonderful it is and how incredible that story it is, and when she finally married Boaz and got the whole princess dream there, did she look at Boaz and go, I want the family history? Oh, my mom? Yeah, she was a harlot. So, Rahab. So, Rahab's the wife of Solomon. Nope, sorry, let me get to Ruth. Ruth, she was a widow, and she was a Moabite, and she became the daughter-in-law of Rahab. Now, this story is very interesting because it's a story of loyalty. Because Ruth married this man whose mother was Naomi. Naomi's husband died. Now, here's what happened. There was a famine going on in Israel. So Naomi and her husband moved to Moab. And they had 2 sons. And the 2 sons married girls from Moab. Naomi's husband died, and both of the sons died. Naomi looked at Ruth and the other daughter-in-law and said, go back to your family, because I'm going home. Go back to your family. Now, think about this. Remember what I said earlier. Women get no inheritance. So Naomi is coming back to Israel for what? Nothing. Literally, she knew, I'm coming back to Israel with no guarantee of anything. Because unless a man in her family or in her husband's family chose to bring her into their home, she would be homeless out on the street. But she chose, I'm going home. Now, Naomi had to tell Ruth this whole story. We're going home. I'm going to go back to my family. You stay here. You go back to your dad. Let your dad take care of you. And the great, that in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, where Ruth said to Naomi, where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. And your people will be my people, and your God my God. What an incredible picture of loyalty. I married into this family. I gave myself to your son, and you became my mother, and I won't leave you. And if you starve, I will starve. If you die, I will die beside you. What an incredible picture of loyalty. And what's interesting is that verse there in Ruth 1:16 is quoted many, many times in weddings by the bride and groom to each other when they're thinking of, making their vows of loyalty to each other. They quote that verse. And so here they came. Here came Naomi. Here came Ruth. And they come home with nothing. Because the land that Boaz had, even when he left, the land that Naomi's husband had, even when he left, it was still his land. and he could have come back home to his land. But once he died, it passed on to his sons, but both his sons died. And so that land is sitting there, and it's picked up by men in his family. Get the land. And the person that ended up with it was Boaz. And so they come back, and Naomi realizes Boaz has our land, or my husband's land. And the law of the Jewish custom was when you harvest your land, you went through and you harvested, but you didn't pick it clean. You know, it's like taking the tractor through it the first time, and whatever's left over, you don't go back through a second time to pick it up. You left whatever you didn't get in the first gleaming, whatever they call it. You went through and you took it the first time, and whatever was left, you left there so those who had nothing could come and take from that. That's how they took care of the poor people that had nothing. And so Naomi and Ruth are out there collecting all of that passed up seed to take it back to wherever they were to fix bread, so they had something to eat. And God put it in Naomi's heart a plan to connect Boaz with Ruth. And Boaz had his eye on her. He kept seeing her, and he told his servants, leave extra for those two when they come. And Naomi planned it out and worked it out, and she told Ruth, this is what you do. Because it was harvest time, Boaz was sleeping in the grinding house, and she told Ruth, you go in and you lay at his feet, and when he wakes up, his response will tell you how he feels. And when he woke up and saw her laying at his feet, he welcomed her into the home and ended up marrying her. And it makes me wonder, what part of Rahab's story moved her son to connect to Ruth? He had to know his mom's story. He had to know how the children of Israel welcomed her in and saved her from her lifestyle. And when he saw Naomi and Ruth, it makes me wonder, did he connect there because of what his mother instilled into his heart, because of what his mother went through and how God rescued his mother? It's interesting because people don't connect those two stories. You read Joshua, and here's Rahab. But in Joshua, you don't hear of Ruth and Boaz. Then you get over here to Ruth, and when you connect the stories together, you're like, wow, that's amazing how God's so cool. So because of that, then Ruth becomes part of the lineage of Jesus because of her faith. Do you know how... Think about what she went through, leaving the home she knew, not returning to her father, came with her mother-in-law knowing they would have nothing, and then literally threw herself at the feet of a man that she did not know. That's faith. God, you're going to take care of me. You're going to walk me through this. And she was loyal. You know what's fascinating to me is that when you go back and read the Old Testament law, none of these people were supposed to marry outside their culture, their family. They were supposed to marry within their tribe and keep it pure. And every one of these women are outsiders being married in. Every one of them. Which says what? When you think about that, what's that say to you? To me, it says that God doesn't, God set the law. God's the one who said to Moses, make this a law. They can't marry outside. And here he does. He keeps sneaking these foreigners, these outsiders, he keeps sneaking them into that lineage of Jesus. Got to let people know. Got to let people know that I'll welcome anybody into this family. That's just awesome. That's awesome. All right, the next one. Anybody have an idea who the fourth one is? If you have any questions online, go ahead and ask. We got quite a group on here tonight. Uriah is a man. But it is in that story. So the next one is found in 2 Samuel chapter 11 and chapter 12. And it's the story of David and Bathsheba. Bathsheba was married to Uriah. Here's another picture of a... again, this is not one of those pictures that you want in your family tree. It's like, man, this tree is just, okay, let's hide this one and let's hide this one. And this is one of those stories that, King David, who was, let's back up to that one there in Matthew who shows David, back up to verse 5, Jonathan. Okay, so we have Rahab, and then we have Ruth. So Obed become the father of Jesse. Jesse's the father of David. Okay, so David, how many generations from David to Rahab? 4. Back it up to verse 5. So you got Salmon, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David. So 4 generations between Rahab to David. I bet none of you really thought about David coming from the lineage of a prostitute. King David, the one person in Romans where it says that he has a heart after God, came 4 generations from the prostitute. Man, that gives us all hope. So here's David. Man, he is the king. Kings are supposed to be out on the battlefield. And if you look at 2 Samuel chapter 11, it's pretty interesting to me. I think it's verse 1 that says this. In the time of war, or in the time of the year of war. You got that pulled up, Jonathan? I'll look it up. Then it happened in the spring at the time when kings go out to battle. So there was a set time to battle. They didn't battle in the winter. These guys were smart, Hey, it's cold, let's go home. The war's over, we'll pick up next year. See you guys, go home, enjoy your family. It's too cold to fight. So it happened in the spring at the time when kings go out to battle that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all of Israel, and they destroyed the sons of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But look at this. But David stayed at Jerusalem. You know what's interesting to me is all these years, David led his men in battle. Battle after battle after battle after battle. David led his men in battle. But this particular year, I'm staying home. And he didn't go. Sent all of his men out there. Then one day he's got up from his bed and says he walked around on the roof of the king's house. And from the house he saw a woman bathing. She was very beautiful in appearance. So first of all, he wasn't where he was supposed to be. And when he sees something that he's not supposed to see, instead of turning away, he continued to watch, continued to see. And then it says, verse 3, so David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? The wife of Uriah the Hittite. Go ahead. Tells him, this is Bathsheba, she's married. David sent messengers and said, and took her. And when she came to him, he laid with her. And when she had purified herself from her uncleanliness, she returned to her house. Now David's the king. She has no choice but to do what David tells her to do. So David lies with her. The woman conceived, and she sent and told David and said, I'm pregnant. David sent to Joab, saying, send me Uriah the Hittite. So Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came, David asked concerning the welfare of Joab and the people and the state of the war. David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. And Uriah went down to the king's house, and a present from the king was sent out after him. Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of the Lord, and did not go down to his house. See, David messed up. David sinned. David blew it, and he tried to cover it up by bringing her husband home, sending him to her house. But he had enough integrity to say, if all these men are out there at war, I have no business going home to enjoy my wife. I'll sleep at the door of the king like all the other warriors. Uriah said to David, wait, did you go too far? Oh, there it is. Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are staying in the temporary shelter, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall then I go to my house to eat and to drink and lie with my wife? By your life and the life of your soul, I will not do this thing. David said to Uriah, stay here today also, and tomorrow I'll let you go. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. Now David called him and ate and drank before him and made him drunk. In the evening he went out to lie on his bed with his Lord's servants, but he did not go down to his house. So here's David again thinking, well, if I get him drunk, he'll go home. He'll go be with his wife if I get him drunk. Nope. Went down and stayed with the servants. Go ahead. Now in the morning David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. He had written in the letter saying, place Uriah in the front line of the fire of the fiercest battle, and withdraw from him so that he may be struck down and die. So it was, Joab kept watch on the city, that he put Uriah at the place where the men there were valiant men. The men of the city went out and fought against Joab, and some of the people among David's servants fell, and Uriah the Hittite also died. So here's David. He blows it. He sins. He sleeps with this man's wife. Brings the man home. Tries to get him to go sleep with his wife. He refuses. And because he refuses, he hands Uriah a letter. Take this to Joab. And in that letter is his death sentence. You're going to die. Take that letter and go, and you're going to die. And this is a man after God's own heart. Go ahead. Verse 18. Joab sent and reported to David all the events of the war. He charged the messenger, saying, when you have finished telling all the events of the war to the king. And it happened that the king's wrath rises, and he says to you, why did you go so near to the city to fight? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who struck down Abimelech, the son of that guy? Did not a woman throw an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died? Why did you go so near the wall? Then you shall say, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So when they come to give David the message, David's going to get mad, but in the middle of it, he says, go ahead. In the middle of it, he said, so the messenger departed and came and reported to David all that Joab sent him to tell. The messenger said to David, the men prevailed against us and came out against us in the field, but we pressured them as far as the entrance of the gate. Moreover, the archers shot at your servants from the wall, so some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead. Then David said to the messenger, thus you shall say to Joab, do not let this thing displease you, for the sword devours one as well as another. Make your battle against the city stronger, overthrow it, and so encourage him. Now when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah her husband was dead, she mourned for her husband. When the time of mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife, and she bore him a son. But the thing that David had done was evil in the sight of the Lord. Bathsheba entered into this sinful act of David. And David and Bathsheba lost the first son. He died. But the second son was Solomon. And Solomon was one of the lineage of David. And God allowed David and Bathsheba to be in the lineage of Jesus. What a family tree. What a family tree. Thank you, God, because it sure gives us hope. And the last and final woman is Mary. The Bible depicts her as a young woman, probably about the age of 14, a virgin. She was engaged to Joseph. How would you like to have been 14 and engaged? Engagements were contracts that were put together by families. They were put together usually a year or so before. The couple began to live together as far as in the same home, but never get involved sexually. And so there was a lot that would happen here if Mary becomes pregnant. God sends an angel, tells Mary, you're going to conceive a son. You're going to have a baby. It's the Son of God. If he found that out and he sent her back home to her family, the family would be disgraced, the whole family. The penalty for sexual misconduct would be stoning, and the engagement would be annulled. She'd be stoned. He would be free. So there's this whole dynamic of what ifs could happen. And as you read through Matthew chapter 1, past the genealogy, and you begin to see the story of Joseph and the battle that he had to walk through with understanding that Mary was pregnant and the disgrace, but he was willing to say, I'll take her on. I'll take her on. Every woman in the lineage of Jesus had a disgraceful moment in their life, and Jesus still brought them all in. I think it's just awesome. I don't want to pick on the women because there were plenty of crazy things the men did. But these are the 5 women that are in the lineage of David that God thought. Now, in my opinion, is that God looked at these 5 women and esteemed them so highly that he had to include them in the genealogy. Did they have struggles? Absolutely. Were they perfect? By no means. Did they make a lot of messes? Absolutely. But God looked at them and saw the pureness of their heart and brought them into the lineage of Jesus. because God knew that he needed them in his family. So 2,000 years after the death of Jesus, we could look back and say, Lord, if you included not just those 5 women, but look at what Judah did. My Lord, come on, that what he did was horrible. Look what David did. What he did was horrible. And they're all included in the lineage of Jesus. It gives us such hope that no matter what we've done, God will walk us through it and welcome us into his family. I think that's just incredible. Wow. Any questions? We got a few minutes left. Death. To the death. To the death.
Always, no matter what?
If they stoned him, it was to the death. Absolutely. 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 If you go back and you read the law, there were so many things that, so many sins that were guilty of to be stoned that would bring them to death. A teenager being rebellious would bring them to a place of stoning, to where they would die. Do you imagine today? First stoning in ages at Chili's. I'm just kidding. It's not. Can't go out there.
Tardiness,
But yeah, it's to death. And here's what's amazing: Paul was stoned 3 times, and God raised him up every time.
You know they had to have some kind of procedure in place where they check the pulse and then, all right.
Well, here's what you think about. They would put you in I don't know if it would be a pit, but it was down in a little valley area. People stood up on top, and they just started throwing stones. And you were covered. It buried you. They did not stop until you were buried.
They throw it at you, right?
Throw it at you.
Until you're buried.
Yeah. There is it's really bad, but there is a video out there that shows a literal stoning a few years ago that happened in one of the countries that still do that. It's bad. As you watch these people throwing the rocks, and they started with the boys. They started with this person's boys, stoner. And the boys had to walk out and start, and they're showing these rocks hitting her in the face. It was bad until she died, and it covered her. I mean, she was left in a mound. She was dead. They're dead. They're covered. They're buried. They did that 3 times to Paul, and each time God rose him up out of the stones. So you think about, the reality of this is Rahab, with her lifestyle, if she had been in the Jewish nation, she should have been stoned. Tamar, for what she did, should have been stoned. Judah should have been stoned. David and Bathsheba should have been stoned.
If you did that,
It wasn't an acceptable job.
oh, no matter what, and just
It wasn't an acceptable job, but it still happened. It's kind of like today. It's not a legal job, and yet it still goes on. So it's one of those things that as you look at the lineage of Jesus, it is amazing if you go through and just look at the character flaws that was in so many of these. In fact, if you compare the two between Luke and Matthew, is it Matthew that leaves them out, or one of them leaves out some of the lineage because three of them were kings, because those kings were so evil that they didn't even record them. One does record them, the other one does not, and I don't remember which way it was. But it's pretty amazing the flaws that were in the line of the lineage of David, or the lineage of Jesus. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. And it should give us such hope that God doesn't give up on us. So, any questions, Jonathan? Thank you for all of you who were watching online. Sue Good, Pastor, do not be angry at me for my joke about Arkansas. I was just kidding. I see you're on there. I'm just joking. So I love you guys. Have a great week. Oh, let me share this with you. Sunday morning, we know that there's predicted a bad storm. We will make a call by Saturday night at 5 o'clock. We will have church. We will have church Sunday. It may be streamed only, because if the roads are bad, we don't want you out on them. So if the roads are bad, we will announce at 5 o'clock on Saturday that we will either have church in the sanctuary, or you stay home on Sunday morning and watch us online on Facebook, and we will do church via video. And I will be teaching out of my living room, and Thomas will be leading worship somewhere, and we will connect all the videos together, and we will be live. So watch for the announcement at 5 o'clock on Saturday evening, and we will let you know what way service is going to happen on Sunday. All right, be blessed. Have a great week. Father, in Jesus' name, each person that's watching tonight, I'm asking you to let your peace be on them. Guard them, guide them, draw them, Lord, into your home, into your life, into your love. Thank you, God. Thank you for the image that you show us of the line of Jesus and the hope that it gives us. We honor you tonight, Father. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a blessed week. We'll see you Sunday.